king for the running of the palace. Hence why he's entitled to a royal guard. You can see all the guards Normally you see them in their red tunics sometimes, but it's winter at the moment, so in their great coats for their winter dress. They're not actors, it's not costume, it's not a replica weapon system, they're infantrymen of the British Army. I believe at the moment it's the 1st Battalion Irish Guards, probably number 9. So they're all trained infantrymen of the British Army. That house is a really important house and a really important building. It's the oldest Tudor residence of its kind inside the City of London that predates the Great Fire of London. It's a really old building. It even stands on the site of a much older building that served as the Lieutenant's lodgings. Because it's so old and because it's the Constable House, some really important visitors have stayed there. So I've already mentioned Guy Fawkes, but Queen Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII, stayed there before her execution. We know that William Penn stayed in there for quite a number of years. In fact, he wrote his book, No Cross, No Crown, which was a very controversial pamphlet arguing about different religions and the likes. He was only released on the understanding that he left the country. That's when he crossed the Atlantic and founded his famous Quaker colony, Pennsylvania, named in honour of his father. Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of Nazi Germany, he stayed in there for 3 days in May 1941. He was only released to the countryside, initially to an Aldershot area, heading to Monmouthshire in Wales for his own safety for the rest of the war. Really important old building. The buildings either side of the green doors just serve as accommodation, again for other yeoman warders or some of the tower officers. The Beauchamp Tower behind me has a state prison room. Go in there, upstairs, notable inscriptions carved into the wall, many of them well over 500 years old. The Doctor's House, the Chaplain's House where James Scott had his head stitched back on, and the beautiful chapel wall of St. Peter had. Yeah, he did, he had his head stitched back on, Michael. Promise you, he did. I'll tell you why, because when they dug up that floor in that chapel in 1876, behind the altar where he's buried, and they dug it up, they found evidence that his head had been stitched back on. They found the bow cord and the hemp wire that was used to stitch the head back on attached to the head and, in the area of the head. It should open again at 1500 hours. For those who can't tell the time, 3 p.m. And it'll be open from 3 to 4. Go in there, that's where it's a beautiful chapel, it's a working chapel. Been a chapel on that site since the 800s. That was built in 1519, 1520. When you walk in, look up the ceiling, it comes from Aragon in Spain. It was put in on the orders of Henry VIII for his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. It's still a working chapel, so gentlemen, when you walk in, please remove your headdress. Don't take any hot liquids or food and the likes. You can take photographs, but please refrain from using the flash. One of my colleagues will be in there to answer any of your questions. We'd like you to ask them where is Anne Boleyn then. You can all ask them repeatedly. That building over there is known as the Waterloo Block. It stands on the site of the Grand Storehouse that was destroyed by fire in 1841. That building was built in 1845 as a barracks for as many as 1,000 soldiers. It now houses the new Jewel House. That is where the crown jewels are kept. There are no replicas, that's where they're kept. If you want to see the crown jewels, go in that building. If you go in that building, you will see the crown jewels. You're wondering why the different connotations of how to see the crown jewels are. It's because one of you will still come up to me at the end of this tour and ask me where they are. There. Far end of the square, headquarters of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, formed here at 1485. They're a really old English infantry regiment, and that regiment still forms part of the British Army's Order of Battle. Cracking little music. But you don't want to know about that, do you? Everything I've just told you in the last 47 minutes you don't really care about, because you just want to know, where did Queen Anne Boleyn have her head shot? Yes, you do? About there. You alright there, my friend? No, you're alright, just sit there, you're okay. Yeah, you're not bothering me at all, not problem at all. We've got a little monument here dedicated to those people executed inside the Tower of London. Now, if you'd have come here like I did when I was a little boy, many moons ago, there'll have been a block and axe there. They used to say that was where the execution site was. Incorrect. That's just a monument to those people executed. There was never a fixed execution site inside the Tower grounds. There's only been 7 people to be executed by beheading inside the tower. The others were all by firing squad and bits and pieces like that. But 7 people by beheading. Two of that 7 were males, 5 females. 3 of that 5 were Queens of England. So let's quickly tell you about those 7 people, and you can go off and explore it for yourself. 1483, down on the lower green, down there was a young man called Lord Hastings. He was a member of the King's Council, but he'd upset the King at a council chamber meeting, and the King said, "I will not dine this day till I see the head of Hastings on a plate." No problem. Drag him outside, find a convenient block of wood, we chopped his head off, we put it on the King's dinner plate, and it went into the King's dinner. So apparently what he said was something along the lines of, "I was only joking." I'm going to jump to the last person to be beheaded by block and axe, just here behind me on this patch of grass here. He was called Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. He was a great friend of Queen Elizabeth I, possibly one of her lovers, how would I know? But he was angry with the Queen with a failed expedition to Ireland, and he came back with a bit of a ludicrous idea to kidnap Queen Elizabeth I and rule in her stead. As I'm sure you can imagine, he found very, very little support for that idea and paid the ultimate price for it just down here. That's the two gentlemen dealt with. Let's deal with the 5 females, 3 of them Queens of England. 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn, the first Queen of England ever to be found guilty of high treason and sentenced to death. She was actually found guilty of trumped-up charges of witchcraft, adultery with other men, incest with her brother George, and high treason, and sentenced to death. Now, for nobility to die, a warrior or a noble way to die would be to be executed by block and axe. She used to write to the King in the hope that he'd change his mind, change it to clemency, life imprisonment. But she never heard back. The last roll of the dice was to say, "I'm scared of the axe." Well, you would be, wouldn't you? I know I would. Well, the King was a nice man. He did a really nice thing. He wrote to Normandy in France and got a French executioner to come over with his heavy-bladed two-handed sword. What a really nice, kind and thoughtful gesture that was. Look at the gold clock. Drop a line to the floor to the entrance of the jewel house, where we keep the crown jewels. The approximate location of Queen Anne Boleyn's scaffold. She got onto the scaffold on the 19th of May, 1536. She delivered a final speech, she said her prayers, she gave some coins to the executioner in the hope that he'd carry out the task swiftly. She was whispering over and over and over again the end of a prayer, which roughly translates from Norman French to, "Oh Lord, or all Jesu, have pity on my miserable soul." She was prepared by her ladies in waiting. The executioner was in stocking feet, so he couldn't be heard moving around. He'd hidden the sword beneath a large pile of straw and hay. When she was all ready to go and all prepared for the execution, he said to a young squire at the end of the scaffold, "Boy, fetch me my sword." The boy answered. Anne moves her head ever so slightly at the sound of his voice, and at that precise moment, the sword comes from the straw, and off comes Anne. So sharp was the sword, so heavy was the blade, and so fast were his actions, that as he picked the head up for the proclamation, the blindfold slipped, and it said that her eye was flickering in her head, and the lips were still moving in prayer. I wasn't there. Lots of people were, and they wrote that that's what they saw. Who am I to argue? 5 years later, this patch of grass here, a lady called Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury. She was 75 years of age. She was the last of the Plantagenet line. She was a true royal. She was the richest lady in England, possibly in Europe, and she'd done nothing wrong, other than be a Plantagenet, and more importantly, the mother of Cardinal Reginald Pole. And it's Cardinal Pole that Henry VIII would dearly have loved to have got his hands on. But the Cardinal was safe in Rome, preaching against Henry, and how Henry had declared himself the supreme head of the church rather than the Pope. Well, they couldn't get the son, they decided to take the mother. She was brought out here, she was brought up onto the block. She was ordered to kneel down, and she refused. This brave 75-year-old lady stood there defiantly and said, "That is for traitors. I am not such." The executioner literally hacked her to pieces where she stood. Now, the following year in 1542, the axe usually fell twice on the same day. This time the victim was Queen Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII, and her lady-in-waiting, Jane Boleyn, Viscountess of Rochford. She was the wife of George Boleyn, the brother of Anne Boleyn. They were held prisoners, as I said earlier on, in the King's house. She had been found guilty of associations with other men, both before and during her very short marriage to Henry. But it was to be her affairs with one Francis Derham, and more importantly her cousin and a member of court, Thomas Culpeper, that proved to be her undoing. Both those gentlemen admitted the affair, and they were executed at Tyburn, where Marble Arch now stands, in December 1541. On the 13th of February 1542, Catherine and Jane were led out of the King's house onto the lower green. Now, we know what Catherine said here because the ambassador to Portugal was in the audience, and he wrote it in his journals and in letters back home. "I died today the Queen of England, but would rather die the wife of the only man I've ever truly loved, Culpeper." Now, was that an admission of guilt or an expression of love? We'll never ever know, but she paid the ultimate price for it just down there. Now, immediately afterwards, he executed Jane Boleyn. Her crimes She knew of her mistress's affairs, but neglected to tell the king. Now, it'd be 12 years before the axe would fall again, and to me, this is the most tragic of all the executions that have taken place in the Tower's history. She was a 17-year-old girl. It was tragic, it was innocent. She was called Lady Jane Grey. She was but a pawn in her ambitious family's want for wealth and for power. They'd even arranged a marriage for her to a young man called Lord Guildford Dudley, who himself was only 19 years of age. On the death of her cousin, King Edward VI, who died at an early age of consumption, what we now call tuberculosis, this young girl was declared queen. They said there was a secret will written by the king wanting a Protestant on the throne rather than the rightful heir, Queen Mary Tudor, who of course was a devout Catholic. She ruled in there for only 9 days, hence why she's often referred to as the 9-day queen. Just let me know when you finish. Got another volunteer for the execution demonstration. You as well, you want it as well, Michael, dear, nice one. So, she ruled there for only 9 days before Mary Tudor took the throne back through force of arms. Lady Jane Grey and her young husband, the Lord Guildford Dudley, were returned to the Tower under sentence of death for high treason following their trials at London's Guildhall. But the Queen did not want the blood of a 17-year-old girl on her hands. So she gave them clemency, life in prison. They could court and everything around the Tower, no problem. But do you remember at the Bell Tower, I told you about that Sir Thomas Wyatt rebellion of 1554? Their parents were heavily involved, their fathers paid the ultimate price for it, the Queen reverted the clemency back to execution. It's believed that Lady Jane Grey was held at number 5 Tower Green and made to watch out of the window as they dragged her young husband out of the Beecham Tower. Should have heard that massive cheer and scream, better than your miserable efforts, as his head was held aloft for the proclamation on Tower Hill. That wasn't enough. She had to watch his headless corpse, dripping in blood, being wheeled across his slope, ready for its burial inside that chapel. And if that wasn't anguish enough, she had to watch the carpenters complete her own scaffold for her own execution an hour after her husband's that very same day, the 12th of February 1554. I believe a truly tragic day in England and especially the Tower's history. We all know about Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Not many people know the correct story of Lady Jane Grey. I urge you to go and get yourself a decent couple of books and read about it, because it's such a sad, harrowing story. There's something on Netflix about it at the moment. That's about as historically correct as that other great Hollywood masterpiece, Braveheart. Which couldn't be further from the truth if it tried, but there you go. That's Hollywood for you. So I've tried to cram 1,000 years of history into 55 minutes. As I said, never my intention to give you a history lesson, but I hope I've whetted your appetite to some of our wonderful, sometimes quite sad history here at the Tower. I've only just hit the tip of the iceberg into that. There's stacks more. Before we go, the last 5 minutes, let me tell you quickly about us, the Yeoman Body, or as I gave you my title before, Yeoman Wardens of His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London, member of the Sovereign's Bodyguard of the Yeoman Regarding Extraordinary. It's a long time, isn't it? Yeah. We could trace our history back to the 1100s, even before that, because this place has been here since Tainted. Somebody had to look after it. But we're officially formed into the unit we are now after the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. This was the last significant battle of the Wars of the Roses. Basically, one individual called Henry Tudor had killed King Richard III and took his crown and thought, I better get myself a bodyguard, and I better get one sharpish. But believe it or not, in 1485, the king didn't have any access to the internet. True story, honestly. He didn't have any social media. I know what you're thinking about. How did he do his TikTok dancing and all that? Well, he had to travel around the country to meet his peoples, lay down laws, raise taxes, and the like. But remember how important this place was and everything I've told you about it this afternoon. Somebody had to look after him. He got his most trusted captain of guard and a trusted body of men, formed them in extraordinary of the Sovereign's Bodyguard, and made them the custodians of the palace and the crown jewels. And we've been here ever since. It used to be after a while you could pay for your position, you bought your position. You gave 250 guineas to the consul of the Tower. He kept it. When you retired, he gave you that money back as a pension, and off you went to live happily ever after with your wife and family. Sorry, I always get that bit wrong. Off you went to live ever after with your wife and family. Sorry, stop me. However, if you died whilst you're in the position, he kept that 200 guineas. He also sold your position onto somebody else to get their money, and your family were kicked out into the streets to fend for themselves. Hence why to this day, whenever we toast the sovereign, God preserve King Charles, we also toast the sovereign body, may you, the yeoman body. May you never die a yeoman warden. We still use it to this day. It became quite an abused system, people buying and selling their positions. So I'm about to retire. Do you want my job? Of course you do. Give me 50 guineas, give him 250 guineas. You could sell it to this gentleman here. He just happens to be the best jewel thief in Europe, and we put him in charge of guarding the crown jewels. It's not a very good idea, is it? Oh, no. Well, it all changed in 1826 with the arrival of the Duke of Wellington. He said from now on, under those sergeant majors from the foot guards, the cavalry or the infantry of the line with meritorious and gallant service could become yeoman wardens. Well, the first one who swore in 1827, yeoman warden number 1 of the new numbering system, was Sergeant Major John May, later the first foot guards of Grenadiers, the Grenadier Guards as we know of them today. Like I say, he was number 1. I'm 420. You know where I'm going with this now, don't you? Since 1827, when he swore in, there has only been 428 yeoman wardens to wear our iconic uniforms. This is our blue undress with its royal cipher. It is not a logo. Aurelius Tertius Rex, King Charles III. You may also see us in our beautiful state dress with our Tudor ruffs and red tights. Don't knock it men till you've tried it, that's all I'll say. And our 8-foot spears, known as a partisan, not a parmesan, as my wife calls it. Robin's bodyguard throwing Italian cheese at people ain't gonna wear it. To be a yeoman warden now, we must have served a minimum of 22 years in the British Armed Forces. We must have reached the rank of warrant officer, sergeant major, or equivalent. No officers. We don't let officers do the job. The whole place would just fall apart. They're absolutely clueless, eh? One of the most dangerous things known to man is an officer with a map. We must also hold the long service and good conduct medal. 22 years of undetected crime. Not getting caught. And we can stay for as long as we want. As long as we're fit and able to do the job, we can stay here. I served for 24 years in the military. I was a paratrooper, forward air control, or a JTAC, bringing fast air, close air support before into the battle area, and sniper, master sniper, that kind of thing. Then 15 years as a civilian police officer before I came here, and I've been here about 2 years. Best job in the world, I love it. More importantly, my wife for 38 years has been telling me she's a princess. Well, I've moved her into a royal palace, so that's all right. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, it's been my absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, remember my name. Yeoman Warden, 420, Gary McCormick, of His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress Tower. I've got a member of the Sovereign's Bodyguard and the Yeoman Guard in extraordinary. If you didn't like it, my name was Jack Ketch. Thanks very much, everybody. For the rest of your afternoon. Crown Jewel, just over there.